I found the alien girl, half dead on the shore, and she clung to me for life. The evening sky was heavy with clouds, and the waves hit the rocky shore with a slow and tired rhythm. A boy named Daniel was walking along the coast, his boots sinking into wet sand. He came there often, not to fish or to meet anyone, but to be alone. The shore was a place where silence stayed, broken only by the sea's voice. But that night the silence felt different, heavier, as if the air was hiding something. Daniel stopped when he saw it. At first he thought it was driftwood thrown out by the sea, but the shape was wrong. He took a few careful steps closer. His breath caught in his throat when he saw her. A girl, pale and motionless, her body half buried by the tide, her hair spread out like strands of silver, catching the weak light from the setting sun. She looked fragile, too fragile to belong to the wild and merciless ocean. He knelt beside her, his fingers shaking as he touched her shoulder. The skin was cold, but not like a normal human cold. It was almost metallic, smooth yet strange, as if the warmth of life inside her was fading but not gone. He pressed his ear near her lips and caught the faintest breath. Relief filled him, followed by confusion. She was alive, but only barely. Daniel looked around. The shore was empty. No boats, no people. Only him and this girl who looked as if she had fallen from another world. Her clothes were torn in places, made of fabric he had never seen before. They shimmered faintly even in the dim light, thin threads glowing as if alive. Her hands were cut, her arms scratched, but none of it looked natural. Some of the wounds glowed faintly with a strange bluish color, not like blood but like light bleeding out of her. He wanted to run, to call for help, but something inside him told him not to. Something about her did not belong to anyone else. If he called the authorities, they would take her away. He did not know why, but his chest tightened at the thought. She did not look like someone who could survive in cages, surrounded by people with questions. She looked like someone who would be lost if left to strangers. Her eyes opened slowly. Daniel almost fell back, startled. They were not like human eyes. They carried a depth of oceans and stars, as if two worlds had been placed inside her gaze. She blinked weakly, her lips parting to form words, but no sound came, only a soft trembling of her hand reaching toward him. He took it without thinking. Her grip was weak, but when her skin touched his, something strange happened. A rush of warmth traveled up his arm, spreading through his body. It was not pain, but it was not comfort either. It was like 1,000 whispers running inside his blood, voices he could not understand. He gasped but did not pull away. Her grip, though weak, had a kind of need in it. She clung to him, her eyes desperate, as if begging him not to let go. "I will not," he whispered, though he did not know why he promised that. Her body shivered and she closed her eyes again, falling into unconsciousness. Daniel looked at her, unsure what to do. She was not just a stranger. She was not just someone washed ashore. She was something else, something his mind could not explain. And yet, she was real, lying there in his arms, fragile and broken. The waves touched his boots, climbing higher as the tide came in. He could not leave her there. He lifted her carefully, surprised at how light she was, almost as if she were made of air. Her head rested against his shoulder, her hand still holding on to him even in sleep. The walk back to his small cabin felt endless. Every step made him think of what he had just found. He imagined people laughing at him if he told the truth. They would not believe him. They would say she was just a girl in strange clothes, just a victim of the sea. But Daniel knew better. He felt it in his skin, in his blood, in that strange energy that still moved faintly through his arm. She was not from here. She could not be. When he reached his cabin, he laid her gently on the bed. The firelight flickered over her pale face, showing the faint shimmer of her wounds. Daniel wrapped her in blankets, though he doubted they could give her the kind of warmth she needed. He sat by her side, staring at her. His mind was filled with questions. Who was she? Where had she come from? Why did she cling to him as if he were the only thing keeping her alive? Outside, the storm grew stronger, the wind howling against the walls. But inside the small room, the only sound was her uneven breathing. Daniel leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He had no answers, only the weight of the moment pressing on him. He had found something extraordinary, something he could not explain. And though fear stirred in his chest, another feeling was stronger. He could not let her go. She was part of him now. And the shore where he had once found silence had given him a secret he could never turn away from. The storm passed during the night, leaving the air heavy with salt and silence. Daniel had not slept. He sat in the old wooden chair by the bed, his eyes fixed on the girl. Her breathing was shallow but steady, her face calm in the dim light. He tried to tell himself she was only a stranger, a lost traveler, maybe a runaway from some ship. But every time he looked at her, the truth pushed against his mind. She was not ordinary. No human body carried light inside its wounds. As the first gray light of dawn touched the windows, she stirred. Her lips moved, whispering a sound he could not understand. Daniel leaned forward, listening. The words were soft, broken, carried in a tongue he had never heard. Her voice was like wind brushing against glass, both fragile and strange. He shook his head. "I do not understand you," he whispered. Her eyes opened again, and for a moment he felt trapped by them. They were brighter than before, a faint glow hiding deep within. She blinked, looking around the small cabin as if the walls themselves confused her. When her gaze returned to him, she raised her hand weakly, pointing at the cup of water on the table. Daniel handed it to her carefully. She drank in slow sips, the trembling of her hand never stopping. When she finished, she tried to speak again. This time the words twisted and bent, almost forming something familiar but never fully reaching his language. Daniel frowned. She seemed to understand that he could not follow. Closing her eyes, she placed her hand on her chest, then moved her finger outward toward him like she was giving him something invisible. Daniel nodded slowly, unsure what she meant, but he could feel the weight of her attempt. The silence between them grew heavy. Daniel tried to distract himself, walking to the fire to add wood, but his eyes kept returning to her. Her clothes shimmered faintly in the light, the fabric shifting with colors he had no names for. When she touched her arm where the strange wound glowed, the light dimmed for a moment as if it obeyed her will. Daniel froze, realizing she had some control over it. She was healing herself, but slowly. As hours passed, her strength returned little by little. She managed to sit up against the wall, her breathing less broken. Daniel gave her bread, which she studied before tasting. The way she ate made him realize something unsettling. She had never eaten such food before. Each bite was careful, her tongue testing it, her body unsure how to handle the simple taste of bread. "Who are you?" Daniel asked quietly, though he knew she could not answer in words. His voice broke the silence, filling the small room with questions he was not ready to face. "Where did you come from? Why did the sea bring you here?" The girl tilted her head, her silver-like hair falling across her face. Her lips moved again, but instead of words, a soft hum escaped her throat. The sound was low, filled with rhythm, almost like a song. Daniel felt it echo in his chest, and he shivered. It was not just a voice, it carried something else, something alive. He felt it brush against his thoughts like invisible fingers searching his mind. He stumbled back, gripping the edge of the chair. "What are you doing?" he whispered. The hum stopped, and her eyes widened as if she too was surprised by what had happened. She looked away, curling her arms around herself like a frightened child. Daniel's heart softened. She was not trying to hurt him. She was trying to reach him. That night, when darkness returned, Daniel dreamed of places he had never seen. Endless fields under two suns, rivers of glowing light that flowed upward into the sky, towers that shone like crystal bones of giants. In his dream, he heard her voice, soft and broken, whispering in the same strange language. And though he did not understand the words, he felt their meaning press into him. Loneliness, fear, the ache of being lost. He woke with sweat on his face, his hands shaking. She was awake too, sitting silently by the bed, her eyes locked on him. He knew then the dream was not his alone. She had placed it in him. Days began to blur. Daniel kept her hidden, bringing food and water, keeping the fire alive. The world outside went on. Fishermen walking along the coast, neighbors passing by, but none of them knew the secret living in his cabin. The girl grew stronger. Her wounds began to close, leaving faint silver scars instead of human ones. She started moving around, her steps soft, her eyes always filled with caution. One evening, as the sky burned red with sunset, Daniel stepped outside to fetch wood. When he returned, she stood in the middle of the room holding something small in her hand. It was a piece of metal that had washed ashore earlier that day, sharp and broken. The moment he saw it, his breath caught. Symbols glowed across its surface, the same bluish light he had seen in her wounds. She looked at him, then at the metal, and whispered a single word. It was the first word he understood. Clear, heavy, filled with meaning. Home. Daniel felt the world tilt around him. This was no accident. She was not lost at sea. She was torn from somewhere else, somewhere far beyond anything he had ever known, and she was stranded here on his shore in his life. He stood frozen while she looked at him with those star-filled eyes. She had given him a piece of truth, and with it, the weight of a choice he was not ready to make. Daniel could not escape the words she had spoken. It stayed in his mind all night, circling like a shadow he could not push away. Home! The sound of it echoed through him heavier than any storm. He looked at her, sitting silently near the fire, her eyes reflecting its glow. She was not simply surviving anymore. She was waiting. For what, he did not know. But he felt it would pull him into a path he had never imagined walking. The girl grew stronger with each passing day. Her movements became fluid, almost graceful, though sometimes she stumbled as if gravity itself resisted her. Daniel noticed how her gaze lingered on the smallest things. The flame of a candle, the rough lines of wood, the sound of rain tapping against the roof. It was as if the world around her was new, both strange and fragile. When she touched objects, her fingers stayed longer than needed, like she was trying to understand them not only with her hands but with her memory. One evening, Daniel tried again to speak to her. You are not from here," he said carefully. She tilted her head, listening. He pointed to himself. Human. He placed his hand on his chest. "Daniel." She studied his face, then mimicked his movement, pressing her hand to her own chest. For the first time, she spoke in a broken, almost trembling tone. "Elira." The name sounded like a secret, soft yet sharp, carrying weight in every syllable. Daniel repeated it quietly. "Elira." Her lips curved faintly, not quite a smile, but something close. It was the first sign that she had begun to bridge the silence between them. Still, the more he learned, the more questions grew. At night, Elira sometimes stood at the window, staring at the stars. She raised her hand, whispering words too quiet for him to catch. The way she looked at the sky made him realize she was not simply lost, she was cut off. Whatever world she belonged to was beyond the reach of ships, beyond the horizon of human thought. But her presence brought other changes too. Daniel began to feel things he could not explain. When she touched his hand, a faint warmth spread inside him. When she looked at him too long, it was as if his own memories shifted, pieces of his past bending under her gaze. Once, when his thoughts wandered in silence, he felt her inside them, not with words but with emotion. She shared her fear, her loneliness, the ache of being far from where she belonged, and, in return, he felt her searching inside him, clinging to the pieces of comfort he carried, his steady breath, his human warmth, the sound of his heartbeat. One night, the dream returned. Daniel saw Elira standing in a vast desert under a sky with 2 moons. Her figure was cloaked in light, her eyes filled with sorrow. She raised her hand and he felt the pull, as if she were calling him across worlds. But behind her, shadows moved, tall and formless, hunting her. He woke with his chest tight, his skin damp with sweat. And when he opened his eyes, Elira was awake too, watching him closely, her eyes shimmering with unspoken knowledge. She had seen the same dream. The following day, something happened that broke the fragile peace. Daniel heard voices outside, fishermen passing near the cabin, laughing loudly. Elira stiffened, her body trembling. She pressed herself against the wall, her eyes wide with fear. Daniel placed his hand gently on her shoulder. "They will not come in," he whispered, though he knew she did not understand his words fully. Still, his tone calmed her. She leaned into his hand, closing her eyes as if trusting his presence alone could shield her. When the men passed and their voices faded, Elira opened her eyes again. For the first time, she spoke another word that Daniel understood. Her voice was low, almost broken. "Hide," the word struck him. She knew the danger of being seen. Whatever she was, whoever she was running from, she could not allow others to find her. And now Daniel carried that burden too. He had to protect her, not only from the outside world, but perhaps from something far greater that reached beyond the sky. Later that evening, Elira touched his arm and closed her eyes. Daniel felt a rush of images again, flashes of crystal towers, a burning sky, and a ship falling into waves of fire. He gasped, pulling his arm back, but the vision had already sunk into him. He understood more now, not with words, but with fragments of truth. She was not simply stranded. She had escaped something. Something had chased her, and she had fallen into the sea of his world. Daniel sat in silence, staring at her. The room felt smaller, the air heavy with secrets. He realized then that his life had split into two paths. One was the world he had always known, quiet, simple, untouched. The other was the world Elira had brought with her, filled with shadows, stars, and dangers he could not name. She reached for his hand again, her eyes pleading. And though Daniel's heart raced with fear, he let her hold it, because in that moment he knew something he could not deny. She was no longer just a stranger on his shore. She was part of him now, and whether he liked it or not, he was standing between two worlds, his own and hers. The days turned colder and the sea grew restless. Daniel could feel it each time he stepped outside. The wind carried whispers, the waves struck harder, as if the shore itself was uneasy. Inside the cabin, Elira had grown stronger. She walked with steady steps now, her wounds almost gone, but the strange silver scars glowed faintly whenever the fire dimmed. She spoke little, but her eyes spoke for her, carrying weight and warning in every glance. Daniel had begun to notice things he could not explain. Shadows passed over the water at night, too large to be boats and too silent to be birds. Once, when he went to gather wood in the forest, he felt eyes on him, though no one was there. Elira seemed to sense it too. Each time she heard the distant call of gulls, she froze as if expecting something else hidden behind the sound. One evening, as Daniel returned from the shore with fish, he saw Elira standing at the window. Her hand was pressed to the glass, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The sky was darkening, but far away he could see faint lights flashing above the sea. They were not like lightning. They moved in patterns, flickering in silence. Elira whispered something under her breath, her voice shaking. When she turned to him, Daniel saw fear in her eyes for the first time. That night she would not sleep. She sat by the fire, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, watching the flames as if they alone could keep her safe. Daniel sat near her, his voice low. "What is out there?" he asked, though he knew she could not answer him in words. Elira lifted her hand, tracing a shape in the air. It looked like a circle, broken on one side. Then she clenched her fist tightly as if crushing it. Daniel stared at her, trying to piece it together. He thought of the glowing metal shard she had once held, and of the dream with the shadow figures. Whoever had chased her had not stopped. They were still searching. The next morning, Daniel woke to silence. Elira was gone. Panic rushed through him as he searched the small cabin, then the shore. He found her standing on the wet sand, the tide brushing against her feet. She faced the sea, her hair moving in the wind like silver threads. Daniel rushed to her side, calling her name. She turned slowly, her face pale, her lips trembling. Then she pointed to the water. Daniel followed her gaze. At first he saw nothing, only the endless gray waves. But then he noticed it, a faint shape beneath the surface, moving slowly like a shadow too large to belong to any sea creature he knew. His stomach tightened. The shape glided closer, then disappeared into the deep. Elira grabbed his hand, her grip fierce, her body shaking. Her eyes told him everything. It had found her. That night the air was heavy. Daniel barred the cabin door, though he knew wood could not protect them from what lingered outside. Elira sat near the fire, silent, her eyes never leaving the door. Daniel stayed awake, his ears straining at every sound, the wind scraping against the roof, the waves breaking against the rocks, the distant call of something he could not name. Hours passed, but his mind refused rest. Then just past midnight the sound came, a low hum, steady and strange, vibrating through the ground. The walls of the cabin trembled. Daniel's heart pounded as he looked at Elira. She was standing now, her body rigid, her scars glowing bright as if answering the sound. She whispered a word he did not know, her voice sharp with terror. Daniel grabbed her arm. "Stay here," he said, though he knew she would not. He took the old lantern and stepped outside. The night was darker than usual, the stars hidden behind clouds. The hum grew louder, not from the sky but from the sea. Daniel's eyes scanned the horizon. Then he saw it, rising from the water like a shadow born from the depths. A shape tall and thin with lines of faint blue light running across it. It was not a ship made by human hands. Elira's voice called his name, desperate and broken. She stood at the doorway, her face pale with fear. The shape above the water pulsed with light, and Daniel felt a pressure in his chest as if the air itself had grown heavy. He dropped to one knee, gasping. The hum was inside his head now, pressing against his thoughts. He heard whispers, broken and cruel, words that did not belong to his world. Elira ran to him, kneeling beside him. She placed both hands on his face, forcing his eyes to hers. The glow in her scars spread through her arms into her fingers, and the pressure inside his head eased. The whispers faded, replaced by silence. But Elira was shaking, her face drained of color. She had taken the weight into herself. The shadow above the sea lingered for a moment longer, its lights flickering in patterns Daniel could not read. Then slowly it sank back into the waves, leaving only the sound of the restless tide. Elira collapsed into Daniel's arms, her body trembling. He held her tightly, his mind racing. The threat was not only real, it was here. And now it knew where she was. Inside the cabin, as Elira lay wrapped in blankets, Daniel sat in silence. His world had changed the moment he found her on the shore, but now he understood the cost. Protecting her was no longer about hiding her from neighbors or keeping her secret. Something far greater was searching. Something that could reach across worlds. And he, a single man on a forgotten shore, stood between it and the fragile girl who clung to him for life. The days after the shadow rose from the sea felt heavier than the storm itself. Daniel no longer walked to the shore without fear. Every sound in the wind, every flicker of light over the water felt like a warning. The sea that had once been his place of silence had become a gate to something darker, something that would not leave them in peace. Elira seemed weaker since that night. Though her wounds had closed, her glow dimmed as if protecting him had drained her. Yet her eyes still carried the same fire, the same desperate will to survive. Daniel tried to keep life steady inside the cabin. He brought food, water, and wood while Elira stayed hidden, but each time he returned he felt her eyes searching for him, clinging to his presence as if every moment apart was unbearable. She did not need to speak for him to understand. He was her anchor in this world, the one thread she had left to hold on to. One night, as rain fell against the windows, Elira sat close to him near the fire. She reached for his hand and held it tightly, her fingers trembling. Then she closed her eyes and Daniel felt it again, that strange pull inside his mind. Images rushed through him clearer than before. He saw her world in pieces, a sky split with burning light, cities collapsing, ships falling into endless oceans. He saw her running, chased by shadows until the sea swallowed her and threw her onto his shore. And then he saw something more, an image of himself standing beside her, holding her hand as she faced the darkness. He pulled back with a sharp breath, his heart racing. Elira's eyes opened, wet with silent tears. She whispered his name, soft but broken, her voice almost human now. Daniel brushed her hair back, his throat tight. "You are not alone anymore," he said, though he knew she could not understand all of it. But she understood enough. Her hand clung harder to his as if she would never let go. The following morning, the sea gave another sign. A piece of metal washed ashore, larger than the shard she had once held. Daniel found it half buried in the sand, glowing faintly with the same blue patterns. When he brought it to Elira, she recoiled at first, fear flashing across her face. But then she touched it with careful fingers and her eyes filled with sorrow. She whispered the same word again, the word that had tied her fate to his ears. Home. Daniel realized then what the truth was. She had not only escaped something, she had been sent away. The sea had carried her because her world had lost her, and now the threat that hunted her had followed the trail. If it found her again, there would be no place safe, not for her, not for him. That night the hum returned, distant but steady, carrying across the waves. Daniel stood at the window, his fists tight. Elira came to his side, her eyes wide with dread. The lights flickered again above the horizon, moving like silent predators in the dark sky. She pressed her forehead against his arm, whispering words he could not understand, but he felt their weight. She was begging him not to let her be taken. Daniel turned to her, his voice rough but steady. "They will not take you. Not while I am here." He knew his words were small against the vastness of what hunted her, but he meant them, and Elira, fragile and lost, believed them. She clung to him as if those words were the only shield she had. The hours stretched endlessly as the hum grew louder. Then just before dawn it came again. The shape rose from the sea, taller and clearer than before, its lines burning with light. The air pressed heavy on Daniel's chest, the whispers returning to his mind. But this time Elira stood before him, her hands glowing with fierce silver light. She faced the shadow, her body trembling but unbroken. Daniel moved beside her, gripping her hand. The glow spread from her into him, burning like fire through his veins. For a moment he felt as if he carried her strength within himself. The shadow pulsed with light, reaching toward them, but Elira cried out in a voice that shook the walls. Her words were sharp, filled with defiance. The glow around her spread brighter, filling the cabin with silver fire. Daniel held her hand tighter, feeling the same power surge inside him. Together they pushed against the weight of the whispers, their combined will breaking through the pressure. The shadow faltered. Its lights flickered, dimmed, then sank back into the sea. The hum faded, leaving only the sound of waves crashing against the rocks. Elira collapsed into Daniel's arms, her body shaking violently. But her eyes were open, staring at him with desperate clarity. She whispered again, but this time the word was different. Not home, not hide, stay. Daniel felt his chest tighten. She was not asking to be taken back, not asking for escape. She was asking him to keep her here in this world with him. He nodded slowly, his arms wrapping around her fragile frame. "I will stay," he said, his voice breaking. "As long as you hold on, I will stay." Elira's hand clung to his shirt, her body weak but her grip fierce. For the first time since he found her on the shore, she let herself cry. Her tears glowed faintly, falling like drops of silver onto his skin. And Daniel, a simple man who had once walked the shore in silence, now held the weight of two worlds in his arms. The storm outside passed, and the cabin grew still again. But inside, in the fragile bond between human and alien, a promise had been forged. She had clung to him for life, and he had chosen to never let go.